Hello, welcome to another video of the DNA problem series. This video is what changes the information in DNA, or another way of expressing it, just to be clear and to emphasize how that information is at, what changes the nucleotides in DNA. We have two general categories of changes or mutations: spontaneous and induced mutations. Spontaneous mutations occur in the normal processes of DNA. Every cell in your body has a complete set of DNA which copies itself to create new cells in the body. Spontaneous mutations occur through errors in DNA replication. Sometimes there are simple copying errors or typos that are made when DNA makes copies of itself. These errors or typos can happen at any letter or nucleotide. One mutation or one type of mutation would change one nucleotide in DNA for another. And here we have an example of that, and in this case, using it as coding DNA by changing one nucleotide, an amino acid gets changed in this particular example. Another mutation or type of mutation would delete one or more nucleotides in DNA. Here we have the example of several nucleotides that were deleted from DNA. Another mutation would insert one or more nucleotides in DNA. And here we have an example of an area that gets inserted into DNA. Errors made when DNA replicates or is transcribed into RNA cause changes in the sequence of bases which make up the genetic code. If you'll go back and watch our video on the language of DNA, or refer to coding DNA and codons and how that is anywhere else, you will see that if we start shifting one nucleotide left or one nucleotide right, then we really are two nucleotides or any number other than three, we're going to really start changing as far as coding DNA. Of course, that's only 2% of the DNA, but nonetheless, you can begin to understand the possibilities, dangerous and otherwise, for changes in DNA. Another mutation would translocate a group of nucleotides in DNA. Take a group of nucleotides of genetic coding and move it from one place to the other. This is called translocation. And a short common name for it is actually jumping genes, and there's some that do that as apparently part of their design. Another mutation would invert a group of nucleotides. If you've studied how DNA is duplicated, you'll find that some of it's duplicated backwards and flipped around. But in any case, there is the possibility of inverting the sequence of a group of nucleotides in DNA. Aside from then the spontaneous mutations, the other category is induced mutations, and they're caused by environmental mutagens. That is, the environment can also cause DNA mutations. Sunlight, cigarette smoke, and radiation are known to cause changes to our DNA. Diverse types of radiation and chemicals can cause changes to the nucleotides in DNA. And here we have a little graph of that, an incoming UV photon. Some of the scientists wanting to study genes and the code of DNA would subject or do subject DNA to X-rays, and that automatically, in a certain amount of the things that are DNA that's subject to X-rays because of being radiation, would make mutations, and then they can study the effects of those different mutations. There's a different type of changes to DNA, and I'm not sure it falls in either one of those two categories, and that can be caused by the interchange of DNA information between organisms, a different type. The classic example of this is bacteria. Bacteria of one type has been shown to exchange DNA information with bacteria of another type. Viruses, as we know, depend on host organisms to reproduce their DNA or RNA. And here we can see some of those scary viruses. Most mutations happen in DNA that is in the cells of our body or other than sperm or eggs. These are called somatic mutations. For example, we can get mutations in our skin cells from sunlight and get skin cancer. These kinds of mutations, somatic, won't be passed on to the next generation. Mutations that occur in the DNA of cells that produce our eggs and sperm are called germline mutations. Germline mutations are passed from parent to child, from one generation to the next. If an offspring inherits a germline mutation from their parents, every cell in their body will have this change in their DNA. These are the mutations that get passed along to a new generation, germline mutations. Without getting specific, we could obviously take years going into this, but without getting specific, these types of mutations cover all the changes to DNA except one type, which we will look at later. As I pointed out in the video, the video called The Language of DNA, these changes occur in the abstract nucleotides of DNA. In the language of DNA, it's pointed out that the nucleotides are just like letters in an alphabet from which words are made, and from those words, in this case, proteins are made by the sequence of amino acids. So these changes occur in the abstract nucleotides, very similar as if we had some text and we start kicking around some letters, adding letters, deleting letters, swapping letters, inverting letters. Not far from that when we talk about changes in DNA. So there's several questions that we should ask or be asked to clear up misunderstandings about changes in DNA. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about this. These are the questions. I actually have three of them. What is the relationship between these changes and the information in DNA? Again, we've showed in previous videos that DNA has information in it. What is the relationship between these changes and the information in DNA? Second question would be, what is the relationship between these changes and the structure of the organisms or organism that's built based on that DNA information? And lastly, what is the relationship between these changes in the environment in which the organism lives? Again, misunderstanding on these points that I hope to clarify. I need to use several adjectives to properly explain the answer to all three questions. All three questions have the same answer, the same explanation. The reason I use different adjectives is sometimes we get hung up and we think it's just a word and we think we're going to argue a word. It's not a word, it's concept. And the concept, because of it being rather wide, can be explained best by several adjectives, and these would be the adjectives that I would want to use. First of all, random. Second of all, unrelated. Third, irrelevant. Fourth, accidental, and then incidental, and then fortuitous, in parentheses, possibly. The first adjective used by most geneticists and even evolutionists is random. Random is used, or these changes are random, as the changes happen independent of information in the DNA, independent of the structure of the organism, and independent of the organism's environment. These changes are also random, as the changes may be fatal, they may be detrimental, they may have no effect, or they may be helpful. The changes are not random in the sense of guaranteeing that they will be different each time, or that eventually they cover every piece of the DNA change. They're random in, again, a random number generator a programmer would make is guaranteed to always give different numbers. They're not random in that sense. These changes are unrelated. That is, they're not connected by reason of an established or discoverable relation. Unrelated, the changes are unrelated to information in the DNA, they're unrelated to the structure of the organism, and they're unrelated to the organism's environment. Another adjective would be irrelevant. That means they're inapplicable. The changes are irrelevant to the information in the DNA. They have no application to the information in the DNA. They're irrelevant to the structure of the organism, and they're irrelevant to the organism's environment. Another adjective would be accidental, and some of the definitions would be accidental, arising from extrinsic causes, accidental, occurring unexpectedly or by chance, and last of all, the definitions, accidental, happening without intent or through carelessness, and often with unfortunate results. So the changes to DNA code happen without intent, and they're not carelessness, but just failures to make a good copy of DNA, and very often have unfortunate results. They're incidental. The word incidental means being likely to ensue as chance or minor consequence. Many or some of the changes or mutations in DNA would be incidental. They're by chance, and sometimes they do have minor consequences. They're incidental, occurring merely by chance or without intention or calculation. No one proposes that these changes are made intelligently or with some intention or with any calculation. So sometimes in the end, and I'm not just trying to give everybody a hard time on this, but sometimes, because if we read the literature, it's rare that a mutation is going to be what we would define as fortuitous, which is occurring by chance, but also fortuitous is fortunate or lucky, and sometimes fortuitous is coming or happening by a lucky chance. But true, sometimes the changes are fortuitous. They have a lucky chance. They have a good outcome. In our next video, just to clarify and drive home this point, we're going to make a video, a maybe shorter video, but what does not change DNA. We have a web page, www.thednaproblem.com. We invite you to visit the web page. If you wish to contact us via email, you can email thednaproblem@gmail.com. Thanks for taking a look at this video.